The other amazing thing about Our Lady of Guadalupe and of the story of Juan Diego, and you kind of touched on it, that while Luther and Calvin and the boys were leading the revolt in Europe, and it was about to kick in. Now, I heard a priest make this point. He said that, do you think that the year 1531 was an accident? That's just the year it happened. Isn't 1531, isn't this when the Diet of Worms occurred or something like that? And when Luther and the boys got together to try, and by the way, for those of you that are Lutherans, I don't mean any insult about when I talk about Luther. I'm a historian. Much of what I say about Luther is historical and not theological. Chris Ferrara will come on this show and we'll talk about Luther's theology. I usually just talk about the history of what happened. And it is historically interesting, I think, to note that at around this time that Luther gathered, what's the church? Is it Wimsburg? What's the town? Is it Wittenberg in Germany? I think it's Wittenberg.
For which?
What is it?
For the Diet of Worms?
No, I think the Diet of Worms happens after this council. That they basically tried to convene a council of those that were in schism at that time. Maybe some of them have been excommunicated, and tried to fashion a liturgy. And there's that word. And they had such vast disagreements over, and one of the principal disagreements was over what form, what species the Eucharist would be served in, or would it be preserved in, or would be a part of their service. Basically, long story short, their council ended in disaster. They could come to no agreement. All it did was cause more schisms, and then you had splintering off of people that left Luther, and where did they go? They went to Denmark, and they began establishing, and here's your divide. Once it divides, it's over. It just kept dividing from there. But these things happened around 1531, so the date is not insignificant. That was my point. And maybe you have some knowledge to share about that.
The Diet of Worms, I believe, took place in 1521. So I'm not entirely sure what was going on in 1531 in Europe. But the fact of the matter is that when the Protestant revolt was going on, it was by 1531 when Our Lady appeared in Guadalupe. The revolt was so fierce that there was already several skirmishes that had broken out and several suppressions that had taken place. It was turning into a full-blown revolution. And as people were leaving the church en masse in Europe, Our Lady went elsewhere and converted a whole bunch more people into the faith.
Right.
So, I think what we can take away from this is that even in times when it looks like things are bleak, Our Lady is always going to find a way not only to preserve the faith, but to make it grow.
Yeah, here's what is written about this by Brother Michael at Catholicism.org. And I was reading this earlier. And the cause of such holiness to be seen in the heart of the country, then in the border cities, is none other than Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe. That's her real name, the Mexican name, Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe. Her coming in 1531 was the birth of Mexico. That is why the secret forces of Masonry, and their effort to destroy the Catholic principles upon which this nation rose up, have attempted with no success to destroy the sacred image, which you and I just talked about. But neither with bombs, as was attempted during the Calais persecution in 1921, nor with the invectives of the liberal press were they able to defeat the Virgin. And in fact, as experience has taught her enemies, the more she is attacked, the more strongly will her children rise up in her defense. Mexico and Our Lady of Guadalupe go together like the sun and its rays. And I think one of the other just phenomenally amazing things about the image on the tilma is that it was when the barbarian cannibals, when they saw it, because they were religious people. They were demonically religious, but they were religious people. When they saw it, they saw one of their virgins. They didn't see Queen Isabella. They saw one of themselves. That's how meticulous to detail was the image. And then there's just so much to this story that you could probably spend the rest of the day talking to someone that's well versed in it. But I'll leave it at this. What's the biggest date that is celebrated by Mexicans and that we think of that Mexico celebrates? Cinco de Mayo. What an irony, right? What is Cinco de Mayo? Cinco de Mayo is basically the day that the socialists defeated the Catholics, and that the beginning of the end of Mexico as a converted Catholic nation, somewhat under the guidance or control of the Spanish. That's when it ended, pretty much, on Cinco de Mayo. Now, today, the establishment of that nation, the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, when the miracle occurred, is a day that is not well celebrated. That, to me, is a tragedy.
Well, and not just in Mexico, but the eldest petulant teenage daughter of the church, France, celebrates the storming of the Bastille, which is the beginning of its downfall with regard to its Catholic faith. So the revolution, as it appears throughout the world, always finds a way to stick its nose, to stick its victory in the face of the church in order to wave it around and say, see, I got your people. We won.
And like my friend Joseph Pierce said about a month or so ago on this show, and I've probably repeated it 50 times since then, well, Michael, it's just throughout the history of the church militant that Our Lady of the Church always looks like she's losing. She always looks like she's battered and bruised and she's losing, but she never loses.
No.
She looks like she's losing. Like right now, looks like you guys are going to get it. Your stupid Pope is going to ruin everything. You're all a bunch of communists now. Yeah, it looks like we're losing. Looks like the faith is losing. Looks like everything is dire. Yep, you're right. But somehow she never actually loses. I think.
Well, in regard to that, I love this image. If you're familiar with the story of Our Lady of Lourdes,
I am.
One of the days when Bernadette was down there in the grotto, she was praying, and she was praying the Rosary with Our Lady, and suddenly the Gave River was starting to flood. It was starting to fill up and overflow. The Gave River, if anybody knows anything about the geography here, the spring that welled up in the grotto is just it's maybe 50 yards away from the Gave River. It's very close to it.
Okay.
And the Gave River started to fill up and overflow, and what's more is that Bernadette reported that she had heard demonic voices and the sounds of terrible beasts growling and howling as the river was flooding. And so she continued to pray her rosary, and as this was happening, Our Lady simply gave a glance towards the Gave River, and it immediately stopped flooding, and the demonic sounds went away. Just from a glance.
Like that. I never heard that. I've never heard that story. See what you learn here?